Hey, do you remember a few weeks ago we had a really awesome live episode of Dev Tips where we all kind of tuned in and had fun and chatted and hung out? We were celebrating the milestone of Dev Tips reaching 20,000 subscribers. Before that show started, I sent out a tweet and asked if anybody wanted to come onto the show and do some code examples or something fun or, whatever. One of the replies to that tweet was from dev tipper Caleb Meredith, who proposed a really awesome idea. Unfortunately, as the time came closer, our schedules couldn't match up with a live show and he wasn't able to do it. But we kept talking and he eventually made an entire video just for you guys on his own. And it's a good one. It really is. It changed the way I look at a lot of things I'm currently doing. And I think that's true of every time you guys come in and teach me something new, whether that's making an entire video by yourself or doing a pull request on GitHub, or just dropping knowledge in the comments down below. And so that's what we're going to do today. I'm just going to pass it over to Caleb. But before we do, you might remember in last week's episode, I teased a big Dev Tips announcement. Stick around, and at the end of this show, I'll have more information for you on that topic. But right now, let's say hello to Caleb and drink deeply from the well of his knowledge.
Hi guys, my name is Caleb Meredith, and Travis has invited me to make a video on the channel about something which really has a lot to do with the meta conversation and discussion on the Dev Tips channel about CSS, preprocessors, frameworks. So today I want to talk to you about a CSS architecture. So first, let's start with the problem. And the problem is this: difficult to read CSS. When we're working in big projects or with groups with CSS, we often find our code being messy, difficult to read, hard to extend, and in the future, after we get in a couple months, hard to come back and look at it again and be able to get in the same mindset we were when we wrote it. So what a lot of people have done is they've created these CSS architectures to help style their code and style the code for their groups so that the CSS becomes more readable. SMACSS, S-M-A-C-S-S, Scalable Modular Architecture for CSS, aims to do just that. It's a CSS architecture that I've adopted. Now, while the CSS architecture, SMACSS, is a bit different from a framework like Bootstrap or Foundation, as it's not anything that you download and install and write functions from and all that great stuff. Instead, it's a set of rules, it's a mindset, it's more abstract. So let's learn more about SMACSS, how to use it, how to make our code better, cleaner, easier to read, and modular and scalable as it said its name. So let's get right to the example.
Every project needs some form of organization. And just throwing styles into whatever Sass file you want isn't organization. What SMACSS tries to advocate is a set of standards, a set of rules for creating a good organization for your structure so that not only you can figure out what you're doing in the future, but also other team members and other people who will have to look and change your source in the future. It's almost the same as we write documentation in our code because we want future generations to be able to figure out what we're doing. We organize our CSS, or more accurately our Sass, so that people will be able to find styles more easily and be able to make changes to them that reflect what you initially had in mind. So as you can see here, I've just created a couple of base files. I'm using CodeKit to compile my Jade and my Sass, so it has its configuration here. I have my index.jade. We're also going to be looking at the wireframe Travis uses for his grid series, and just look at SMACSS in relation to this when we start going in depth. Alright, so in here I've set up a couple of blank Sass files. Here in my index, I'm importing all of the files I will use. Okay, so SMACSS composes of 5 categories: the base, layout, modules, state, and the 5th category is theme. But as most websites don't have themes, it's not that important to add. But basically all of the styles you throw in theme are the styles that are going to be changed depending on the theme you're loading. So I'm not going to go over them in this video. They're not too important. Anyway, and then for me, when I use SMACSS with Sass, I add the utils and the vars file. Now you have to remember that SMACSS was not originally created with Sass and other preprocessors in mind. So I've I've changed a couple of the rules of SMACSS and added to it in order to better fit the Sass preprocessor environment. So as you can see here, my utilities file is just a couple of utilities, golden ratio, screen sizes, stuff like that I use on every project, and my vars is empty, but it's where I would put variables for my project. All right, so let's get started writing code. As you can see, here's what the index.j looks like, and here's what it renders to. So we're going to start with our base styles. The base styles define what an element should look like anywhere on the page. They are the defaults. So if you're using a reset, the values that the reset changes your styles, that's the defaults for your project. So base rules are going to include things like your default typography, font family, sans serif. Maybe you like to change all your boxes, box sizing, border box. Maybe you like to do that to all your elements on the page. I know I do. Or maybe you want to make all your links have the default be red and the hover be blue. I don't know. Whatever you want to put in the base. But all the styles in your base should be the default styles for the entire page. So as I mentioned before, all of your reset files are really a part of the base style. So I like to use normalize.css. I'd probably put up here at import normalize. So that's what I would do. You can do whatever you want. So all your default styles for how anything should look anywhere on the page goes in the base. And you should not have any classes or ID selectors in your base files. No, if you're going to need to put a class in here, you need to have a really good reason. And as I go over the other categories that SMACSS provides, you'll realize that when you need to use a class, you should be able to put it in one of the other categories. You should not need to put it into your base style. Next up, next category is layout. So the layout styles will divide the page into sections, into major sections, not like minor sections like the navigation or maybe the sidebar, for example, but the major sections. And layouts will hold multiple modules together. So let's for a moment talk about what a module and what one of these large layout elements I'm talking about is. So I would consider a module on this page to be perhaps the navigation. I would consider that as a module. Or more specifically, I would consider this to be a module. This little card with the title and like a little label, some metadata. I would consider this to be a module. I would also consider this right here to be a module using, or the same module as this, just with different content. I'd also consider this to be the same module in all of these. I'd maybe consider this to be a subclass or an extension of this module, but we'll get into that later. I'd consider these little external links to be their own module. I'd also consider this search box to be its own module. I might also consider this entire little box right here to be its own module. So anything on your page which are reusable and modular parts in your design, they will be a module and they'll be styled as such. Your major elements that you're going to group together in your layout is going to be your header or your main content or your footer. So these are like the main sections that stick out to me: footer, main content, and header. And so we should indicate these with IDs. Now, this should be only the one of two times you are going to be using ID selectors on your page. Because there's only one section, you're going to use the ID, of course. The other instance you're going to use, here, let me also just move the hello world in here. The other instance you're going to use IDs is if you wanted to give this header, say, an ID, so when you type it in the URL, it jumps down to that. That's the other situation where you might want to use an ID. Otherwise, your ID should be strictly restrained to your major elements of the page, which is typically the header, main, and footer. You can also maybe say your sidebar is a major element, or maybe like your navigation menu is a major element, or you could say it's a module. Whatever your preference is and whatever the requirement of your project is. And when I talk about more about modules, you should be able to better decide how you want to define these as major layout elements or as a module. So we'll define the styles there. But so not only do we define the major element styles in our layout.sass, we also define specific modular classes that we will append to our modules and other elements throughout our page. So for example, Bootstrap has this pull right class, right? Where it says pull right, float right, and pull left, float left. So that's the type of utility class we will be creating and adding into our layout file as the second type of thing we'll put in here. Now, before I go on, I want to talk a moment about naming conventions in SMACSS. So if you've ever heard of the concept of name spacing, it's basically adding the name to the beginning of another element to help distinguish it from anything else. So I don't know if you've ever run into the problem where maybe you're writing CSS and you have label of blah, 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 and you put in whatever styles, but then you come to another element later on and you also want it to be a label. So instances where you feel like two different things really have the same name. Well, name spacing it, you can say element A label, or maybe header label, and then maybe footer label. So ultimately they're called the same thing, but they have a different namespace, a different prefix. So I use this in all my variables too. So maybe I want to have a different color for my heads. So I might say C for color head, or C link, whatever. And I also prefix my mixins. So I typically like to have a mixin for type. So I would type T head, as in my typography for my header. So I prefix everything you do in Sass, and it'll just kind of help you organize better. So for the layout, which brings us back to this, for all of these modular classes we're going to use to lay things out, and if we want to move stuff around, pull it left or pull it right, we're going to prefix it with L. So I typically don't put the pull. It's your choice. I typically just do L right for that, L left for float left. Maybe you even want to do dot layout align center. Yeah. And then you can do text align center. So these layouts are meant to be just appended wherever onto your thing. So maybe not to your major layout elements like these, but to your modules and other elements within your page. You can now use these layout classes to just quickly float anything left, float anything right, and define the layout. So to recap, in the layout.sass, we're going to have our major layout elements like the header, main content, or footer, and we're also going to have our modular layout classes, which we are going to append to modules and whatnot. All right. So next up on our list, we have modules. Modules are the reusable little bits of SMACSS that you can throw around everywhere. So if we go back to here, and when I was talking about layouts, I mentioned I would consider this a module, I considered this the same module, this a module, this a module. I considered this maybe a module. I'd consider probably this whole column a module. Modules are reusable bits of code, and they should be kept that way. Now, I'm not sure if you noticed, but I also created this modules folder, because as you can imagine, we're going to have a lot of modules. Modules are the most important part of SMACSS, and I'm going to have a lot of them, so I'm going to want to make my own file for them. So I would consider this maybe a card module. So let's just quickly write up some of the markup for these modules. So if I were marking up the card, or this card here, I'd say card. So this would be my namespace. This will be my namespace, as I mentioned earlier. My prefix, it'll be a card module, and then I'm going to call card label. I'll tell you why I do the 2 dashes in a bit. What does it say? Card meta 222 h2 dot card head lorem ipsum. What else do we have? We have a paragraph. We'll call that card copy, and I'm just going to throw in some wrong command. Just throw in a bit of lorem ipsum there, and then I'll have ul.card tags list item card tags tag, and here. And what I'm going to do is, for the tags, I am going to define a second module that's inside of the larger card module. So tags tag ipsum li dot tags tag lorem. All right, and just for another example, I'm just going to quickly make a module for the navigation, just as another example. So I do ul nav, again being the name, or in the namespace that we're going to use, and then li nav item home li nav item blog li dot products, and then li dot nav search, and we're just going to put in input type equals search. Okay, so next thing I'm going to do is I want to create what? I have 3 modules, right? I have my nav module, I have my card module, and I have my tag module. So let's create 3 files. This one will be card.sass. Throw it into my modules here. This one will be nav.sass, right there. And this one will be tags.sass. And then in my module sass file, I'm just going to import them. So I'm not cluttering up my modules file too much. Instead, I'm breaking them all into different files. And these module files, you will end up having a lot of them, and they will get pretty long. So thank you, Sass, for allowing me to import. Did I misspell something? I did. There we are. So thank you, Sass, for allowing me to import these files and use variables and all of that stuff. Okay, so I just have some pre-written styles that I'm just going to quickly copy and paste. Tags, and I'll explain it a bit. Nav. All right. So there we go. And I'm just going to make one more change before I go over them. In my base styles, I typically like to have my unordered lists be opt-in for the list styling, if that makes sense. So instead of opting out in every single module, I'll instead decide, if I have an unordered list, I'll decide to opt in or not. So I'm just automatically saying the default is no list styling, no margin, no padding, just as it is. All right. So let's go over these modules. First, we'll look at card. All right, so I set the max width to 400, give it a bit of margin. And now probably the first thing you'll notice as a little weird or different or something you haven't seen before is this. I do and dash dash label. So why would I do that instead of just card label? Well, let's see how this compiles. Save it, let it refresh, and we'll go down to index.css. Where are we? All right. So you'll see something a bit different when I write it like this and when I write it like this. When I write it like this, you'll see that Sass automatically nests these two in it. So it's card and then it's .card label. Whereas here, it just does card meta. Now, doing this is a much better practice. And this is something this is a kind of a more abstract topic that not many people get. But CSS specificity, which is here, let me put this back and then just look back in this file again. CSS specificity, so when you nest two things, when you say card and then inside of it card label, that's actually not a good practice. Because what this does is it increases the specificity for these card label styles. Now, you might not understand specificity. It's kind of difficult to explain. So I'm going to say if you want to learn more about specificity and why it's bad, there's a great article on CSS tricks. Otherwise, just take my word for it and know that's bad. Basically, what happens is the deeper you are in nesting, the harder it is for the rest of the CSS to override those styles. And if you've ever been in a battle where you have to put exclamation mark import and then look at the old style and change it, that's because of specificity. So when we do it like this, trust me, it'll save you a lot of headache in the future and a lot less exclamation mark imports by simply doing it that way. So this is a little trick that has been hiding in Sass right under your noses likely for the whole time you've been using it. All that it does is it says the ampersand means for all the selectors above me, add this to it and then output it. So and -- label. So as you can see, .card, we took .card and we prefixed it. So we got card -- label. And I said it's probably been hiding under your nose because here, look at my base styles. When I declare a color red and hover, let's go up to the style here. All it's doing is, again, taking the A and then adding hover to it. So I can put whatever I want here. Whatever. It doesn't matter. It'll prefix it, or it'll affix it. I guess is the correct word. Whatever I put there. So the most common usage is with pseudo classes, but you can do it with whatever. And so this is just a nice little shortcut. And it lets us keep the awesome nesting feature of Sass, and it avoids us having to write things like this, which we would have to do normally. So Sass is pretty cool, letting us do that. We love indentation, so yay Sass. All right. So now, why do I do this -- here? Like, it probably doesn't make sense to you. Why don't I just use a single dash? Well, okay. So again, card is our namespace here. And then label is the name of the element. So card namespace, meta is the name of our element, etc., etc. Well, what if I want the namespace to be slightly different? What if I have another variation? This layout actually provides a great example of this. This module right here is pretty much the same as each and every other module, except for it has a slightly different background. So maybe, what if I wanted to write card fade? What if I just wanted to write that? And then I wanted all of these other things to be inherited. Well, it would be a little difficult if I did this as a single, and then what I can do is then I could just write card fade -- label. Although I don't recommend that, I just recommend using the default styles for card. But what if I had something like this, and then I was only using a single dash? So if I were only using a single dash here, and I was doing this, it's where does the namespace end, in this case card fade, and where does the new element begin? So to help distinguish, I use the 2 dashes. Sometimes you'll see 2 underscores. I like 2 dashes. You can, whatever style you like, you can use, but that's what I like to do. So again, to recap, this is going to be our name, or this together is our namespace. This is the main name. This is maybe a different type. So 1, 2, 3, whatever, red, blue, pink, whatever. And then, so you separate those two by a dash, and then you separate the element, so label, meta, head, copy, or whatever, by 2 dashes. All right. So those are our modules. So here's just the code for nav, and here is the code for tags. Now, our last and final section is state, our last and final category, that is. What state defines, it's a way to describe how our modules look when in a state. So this is really for the interactivity. And is it hidden? Is it expanded? If you have maybe a jQuery accordion, can you see the content? Can you not see the content? So the state helps us better define what an element looks like when it's in a state at a specific time. So, and like we prefix layout with L dash whatever, color with C dash whatever, we prefix our states with is. So for a nav, we might commonly see this as is selected. So as you can see, I wrote a bit of Sass here, which says when it is a nav item, again, remember what this and is doing, it's just pulling the nav down. And here another ampersand where it's taking this item, pulling down nav, and then adding is selected. So when we have a nav item and it is selected, so we can see how that renders right here, nav item and dot is selected, we can color it blue. It's an arbitrary color that I picked off the top of my head when I was styling it. Obviously not the most aesthetically pleasing. I hope you don't use that for your real website. But yeah, that's how you do a state. All right. And so one last comment about modules that I'd like to make is, as you can see with this nav search, what if I had in my items that I wanted it to have border solid 1px black? A concept of many programming languages is extending. So you see how I have these nav item, nav item, nav item. I would consider that my most general. And here, I'm going to remove that blue. It doesn't look very good. Well, the outline doesn't look good anyway, but it's for demonstration purposes. This nav search, I would consider a nav item, but I don't want to, but writing nav item and also nav search kind of makes my markup very messy. So what Sass allows us to do is really cool. It just allows us to go and dash dash search at extend dot nav item. So it just kind of allows us to easily extend that, and as you can see, it gets its border. If we aren't extending it, it's not going to have a border. Yeah, and you'll notice that I can't use the ampersand here. No, I have to write it out here, but alas, that's one place you can't use it. So, all right. So just a couple closing thoughts. If you want to learn more, I don't like that board. I'm taking it out. If you want to learn more about SMACSS, then just go to this website. The SMACSS isn't originally my idea, and if you want to learn more, just go here. You can read all about it. But remember, it's not originally created for Sass. So I just gave you an example of how I use it, of how some of my ideas and how to implement it with Sass and other pre-processing languages. So thank you so much for your time, and have a good day.
Wasn't that awesome? I know that I'm going to take a serious look at my styling habits and insert some SMACSS up in there. So last week I teased about a big announcement coming up. It's exciting. The announcement is that I'm in the process of organizing an exclusive community for dev tips, and it's happening very soon. I've set up a form that you can use to be notified when it launches. You can't click on this thing, but in the description below is a link to that form. The first 100 people who sign up will receive a dev tip sticker and a personal note from me in the mail. Be sure to click that link in the description. I'm really excited about all this. And also, next week's release is going to be accompanied by a live dev tip stream. The first 10 people who join will join me and we'll watch next week's video together, and we can hang out afterwards, talk about questions and shoot the breeze, whatever. I'm exploring different options for the community bonuses, and this might be like a fun thing to do. Anyway, until I see you again, keep on hacking.